In this session, I will demonstrate how to place devices into your data center using the Device Manual Add functionality. To get to the Device Manual Add function, go to IT Ops, Device Management, and Device Manual Add. This is one of the most useful pages because it enables managers to keep device data up to date with minimal effort. So when and why should this page be used? Here are 4 use cases. First, use it to add infrastructure devices that do not require power, like patch panels, cable managers, and rack PDUs. Second, use this page to mark certain rack units in a rack as unusable. There are a number of causes that make an RU unusable. One common one is that cables are routed through a given RU from the front to the back of the rack, making it unusable for mounting a device. Regardless the cause, if a rack unit is unusable, it should be tagged as such to take it out of the usable inventory of rack units. We do this by creating a device called an unusable RU. And frankly, we simply install that device into the unusable RU location. Third, use this page to add a device into a specific rack and rack unit without consideration for power, space, and cooling thresholds. For example, sometimes a device is installed outside of normal protocol, requiring the manager to enter the device information after the device was installed. In such a case, the device is live and in production, so the database needs to be updated to reflect the device location, regardless of whether that location violates any thresholds. And the fourth use case is to place devices into a storage room. For example, when a device is received on the receiving dock, it might be moved into a storage room. This page can be used to record that the device was received and placed into storage. In short, there are a number of cases when this page can and should be used. All right then, let's talk about how to use the page, starting at the top. The first field is a checkbox enabling you to have a commission request ticket automatically created to record the date, time, device details, and the reasons why you're adding a device into your data center. The next field is the name of the person on behalf of whom the commission request ticket should be made. The field defaults to you, but if you are adding devices into your data center on behalf of another member of your team, you may select their name from the drop-down. I'll leave it my own name for this session. Next, if the commission request ticket has already been created for the devices you're adding, then simply uncheck the automatically create ticket and select an existing ticket from the drop-down. In this case, I'm going to leave the automatically create ticket checkbox checked. Next is the customer reference number. As discussed in other videos, the customer reference number is for cross-linking this in-command commission ticket to your internal ticketing system. For example, if your company uses ServiceNow ticketing and a ServiceNow ticket has already been created to track this device through its deployment cycle, the ServiceNow ticket number should be entered here to cross-link the tickets in both systems. I will assume as much and enter a fictitious ServiceNow ticket number. The install date is the next field, and this reflects the date the device was actually installed or the date that you're planning to have the device installed. Simply click the install date field, select a date and time from the calendar, and it populates the field. The purchase order number field is next. Do not overlook this field. It is required and is one of the most valuable fields on the form for managing assets. If a valid PO is not applicable, then you can enter NA in this field to indicate as much. On the other hand, if there is a valid PO but you don't have it on hand, you can enter TBD standing for to be determined, which means you'll have to come back at a later date and populate it with the correct PO. Preferably, you'll have the correct PO number on hand and you can enter it at this point. Next is the server owner custodian field. This is the name of the person who will be responsible for administering and supporting the server once it's in production. Choose the member of your team that will be that role and select it from the drop-down. In addition to a server owner and custodian, there's a preferred functional group that will be responsible for administering the server. This is a functional group that the custodian belongs to. Choose it from your drop-down. In this case, I'll choose the compute functional group. Next, I'm given two radio buttons. This gives me the option of adding the device to the data center or simply adding the device to our storage room. If I select Add to the storage room, the form shortens and asks me for 5 additional fields of information. What storage room? What's the device type that you're adding? What's the device name, serial number, and asset tag? For the purpose of this training session, I'm going to select Add the device to the data center to maintain the long form. We're now at the rack used field. This field designates the rack into which the device is to be or has been installed. Select it from a drop-down list of racks. In this case, I'm only given one rack to choose from, so I will choose rack A05. Below that is a Show Rack Elevation dialog box. If I click on that, it shows me the current rack elevation of rack A05, so I can see where my open rack units are for installing the next device. I can already tell I'm probably going to use rack unit 7, so I can populate the bottom of the rack towards the top. The next field is your orientation field. There's two options for this field, front and back, and it's used to designate whether the device is to be installed front facing in the rack or facing the back of the rack. I'll choose front. That gets us to the device type field. Clicking on the device type field opens our library of device types. Like other lists, I can filter and sort this field. I will select Dell in the manufacturer to look at only my Dells. I will sort it by model in an ascending, and there it is. I'm looking for Dell R720. I will select the Dell R720, and it will then populate my device type. Scrolling down the page, I get to the next field, which is Power By. I have 3 options for Power By. I can power this Dell R720 using its faceplate wattage, using a 30% derated faceplate, or using a special company allocation that I've determined to be appropriate for this device. In this case, I'm going to use the special company allocated watts, which is 350 watts for this R720. Now the next field allows me to actually select a Dell R720 out of my storage room to repopulate back into the data center. Clicking on Select from Storage gives me a list of all the 720s in my storage. In this case, I have none, so I'll leave that blank. Now, what rack unit do I want to put this R720 in? As I mentioned before, looking at the Show Rack Elevation, yes, I was going to put it down there in rack unit 7. So I enter a 7 in the rack unit. Next is the device name. Now, the device name populates with a temporary name. However, if I know the actual device name, I can type it in here. At this point, though, I'm going to leave the temporary name. Serial number is the next field. If I know the serial number, I should enter it at this point. If I don't, I can also leave the TBD default. I'm going to enter a serial number. Asset tag. Some You may or may not use asset tags at your company. This is an optional field. If you do, populate it. If not, you can continue on. The status field. If the device or the status field defaults to reserved, assuming that you're planning ahead to deploy this device. However, if the device has already been deployed and you're now just updating the database, you can select that the status of this device is already active. In this case, we're using status reserved. The next four fields are chassis, chassis type, chassis slot, and chassis available capacity. These are all used for when we're dealing with chassis and blades, and for the sake of time, I'm going to leave these for another session. The final checkbox on the field is whether you want to send email updates to yourself or to the person on behalf of whom you're making this device manual add. I'll go ahead and check that box so that emails get sent. At the bottom of the page are three buttons. One, the first is to actually add the device into the data center. If I'm pleased with my entries and all the above fields, I will click Add Device, and the device will be added into the specific rack and rack unit, and it will be listed here at the bottom of the page for me to verify the information. At this point, I'm going to take a moment to add a second Dell R720 into this rack. I'll keep it the same rack A05, front facing, only this time, looking at the rack elevation again, I'll put it in rack unit 11. Entering rack unit 11, the device name defaults to a temporary name again. I will enter a new serial number, leave the asset tag blank, status is reserved, and I will add the second device to the form. I now see that I have two devices. You can add as many devices as you like in one device manual add action. When I'm done adding devices, I now have the final two buttons to choose from. The first is Submit the Changes and Complete the Commission Request. I'll use this button if I'm adding the device after the device has already been installed, in which case the commission request that's tracking this action will be opened and closed automatically for me. The other button, Submit Changes and Leave the Commission Request Ticket Open, I will use if I'm reserving space for a future installation. In this case, I'm going to select Submit Changes and leave the commission request open. That opens one final dialog box for me to add additional information. I can add a priority level, urgent, high, medium, or low. I can update the title. It gives me a default auto-generated Dell R70 commission, and I can add additional information that'll be maintained on this ticket if the form didn't capture it all for me. Finally, I can assign the ticket perhaps to a data center technician to install the device, and I can enter additional emails if I want other people to be noticed that this device has been added. I can select a file or picture to upload to this request if that would be helpful, and ultimately save the request. I'll click the Save button. That closes the form, and my devices have now been added. Let's check and confirm that they're there. Selecting rack A05 from my input fields, going to my data center views, rack elevation. It shows me A5, and look, there they are. The first Dell R720 in rack unit 7, and the second one in rack unit 11. Very cool. Let me note, however, that we have just added the physical devices to rack unit 5. We have not connected these devices to power circuits or cables. That needs to be done in a device update step. To learn how to connect power circuits and cables to a newly added device, please watch the next video entitled Device Update with Request. Wow, that was a lot, but it's pretty straightforward, wouldn't you agree? As I said in the beginning, this is a very useful page. You'll get accustomed to it quickly and will appreciate it a great deal. This concludes the session. Have a great rest of your day.